Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on an incredible journey right into the rigidly codified social theater of 19th century England. We aren't looking at kings or wars today, no. We're reconstructing a human world through the everyday material constraints of ordinary and extraordinary people alike. So, let's step completely out of the modern world and straight into the drawing rooms and the incredibly strict social hierarchies of the Victorian era.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Now, you might think drinking tea and paying social calls were just polite, leisurely hobbies, but as this quote points out, they absolutely were not. They were highly complex theaters of social, discipline, exclusion, and honestly, survival. Every single action, from exactly how you held a cup, to the specific time of day you ate, right down to the type of paper you used to announce your arrival, it was all part of an unyielding system that strictly dictated your place in the world. Section 1. The Ritual of the Threshold.
To truly understand this world, we have to start at the front door of a London townhouse. Think of it as a physical barrier between the chaotic, smog-filled streets and a highly controlled domestic sanctuary. You wouldn't just walk up and knock, right? You presented a calling card to a footman. Imagine holding this card in your gloved hand. A standard lady's card was exactly 9 by 6 centimeters of heavy, expensive, unruled white paperboard. And I mean purely white. If you handed over a card with, say, colorful embellishments or silk fringes, well, it wasn't seen as creative. It was instantly judged as a glaring sign of ill breeding.
But here's where it gets fascinating. These simple white cards held a silent, mechanical code. Victorians could convey incredibly specific, deeply intimate messages without ever speaking a single word to the host, just by folding a specific corner of the card before handing it over. It's like a secret language. If you folded the upper right corner, it meant you delivered it in person. The lower left? That expressed quiet sympathy for a death or illness. Meanwhile, folding the upper left signaled joyful congratulations.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the physical objects in the entrance hall were quite literally weaponized. So you handed that carefully folded card to the footman, never the butler, by the way. And if the footman told you the mistress was not at home, well, that often wasn't a statement of fact. It was a polite yet absolutely devastating social rejection. Your card was then placed on a pie crust silver salver. These trays actually had a specifically designed raised rim so the cards wouldn't slip. And hostesses, they were ruthless. They would strategically arrange the tray, leaving the most impressive aristocratic names right on top for the next caller to see. They turned a simple silver tray into a massive tool for social gatekeeping.
Section 2. The Code of the Kettle.
So, if you successfully passed that threshold, you were admitted into the inner sanctum, the drawing room. Now, the entire institution of afternoon tea that took place here, it actually began as a solution to a purely biological problem. See, back in the 1840s, artificial lighting had pushed the upper-class dinner hour much later into the evening, often around 8 p.m. Anna Marie Russell, the 7th Duchess of Bedford, famously complained of having a sinking feeling in the late afternoon. So to bridge that agonizing gap between a noon lunch and a late dinner, she simply requested tea, bread, and cake in her room. And in doing so, she inadvertently created a lasting social institution.
The physical, environmental setup of this new meal, which was originally called low tea, was incredibly specific. It required low parlor tables and plush, comfortable armchairs. The actual food was almost an afterthought compared to the social interaction. In fact, the food wasn't even prepared in the main kitchen. It was made by maids in a separate still room. And those famously delicate, crustless sandwiches, that was out of pure practical necessity. It was just to avoid dropping crumbs or smearing butter, which would permanently ruin a lady's pristine, expensive silk gloves.
Once you were seated, you were subjected to some seriously strict physical discipline. You had to stir your tea gently back and forth, never in circles, making sure the spoon never made a vulgar clinking sound against the fine china. And here's where we absolutely must debunk a massive modern myth. Pinkies remained strictly down. Raising your pinky finger wasn't elegant, it was actually considered incredibly rude and pretentious. You'd unfold your napkin on your lap, take tiny bites, and above all, you never ever looked overly hungry. Looking starved was a severe breach of manners.
Section 3. The High Tea Divide.
Let's shift our focus away from those wealthy elite drawing rooms for a moment and step into the grueling reality of the 19th century working class. So the crucial point here is how completely backward our modern understanding is. Today, fancy hotels use the term high tea to sound, upper class and elegant. But historically, high tea had absolutely nothing to do with high society.
In historical reality, it was a heavy, desperately needed working-class dinner.
Let's methodically compare these two completely distinct worlds side by side. The names literally come from the constraints of geography and furniture. The aristocracy enjoyed their leisure at low parlor tables between 3 and 5 p.m. But a coal miner or a factory worker, they couldn't exactly stop the Industrial Revolution at 3 p.m. for a crustless sandwich. They came home completely exhausted between 5 and 7 p.m., and they sat at standard high dining tables with straight-back chairs. They didn't need delicate networking. They needed essential nutritional replenishment, hearty meats, pies, and heavy bread, literally just to survive the physical toll of their labor.
Section 4. Material culture and class.
This incredible class divide actually built itself into the very physical properties of the ceramics they used. This brings us to a fascinating historical slur, MIF, or milk in first. The aristocracy used this acronym to quietly identify and judge individuals of lower class origins, entirely based on the order in which they poured liquids into their cup. But here's the thing, the reason behind this wasn't just arbitrary snobbery, it was grounded in raw material science.
And as brilliantly illustrates the invisible constraints of everyday life. You see, the working class drank from cheap earthenware mugs. If you poured boiling hot tea directly into a cheap cold clay mug, the thermal shock would literally shatter it right in your hands. So they had to pour cool milk in first to temper the heat and protect their only dishes. The elite, however, owned high-fired, incredibly expensive, imported bone china, which could easily withstand boiling tea being poured first. So, economic constraints and the physical limitations of cheap ceramics accidentally birthed this massive class prejudice that survived for over a century.
We see that exact same sensory contrast in the food itself. Elite pastries were baked fresh, they were soft and delicate. But the tea biscuits affordable to the working class? They were practically brick hard. To even make them edible, they had to be dunked into hot tea. It was just a practical survival tactic. Yet the rich, who never once had to worry about breaking a tooth on a stale biscuit, condemned dunking as this uncouth, childlike breach of manners.
Section 5. A space for women.
Now, it's absolutely fascinating how these incredibly strict rituals surprisingly incubated something else entirely: female empowerment. Afternoon tea created a rare, socially sanctioned moment of physical liberation. Enter the tea dress. Unlike the painfully rigid, bone-crushing garments required for formal dinners or walking out in the street, the tea dress was a loose-fitting, flowing garment, usually made of silk or chiffon, but most importantly, it was famously worn entirely without a restrictive corset. The afternoon tea hours provided a literal, physical breathing space where women could finally actually fill their lungs completely.
But that liberation wasn't just physical, it became highly intellectual and political. In a heavily male-dominated society, the drawing room during tea time became a structurally insulated space specifically for women. Men were allowed to attend, sure, but they were strictly guests in the hostess's domain, where she exercised absolute authority. Without constant male oversight, these gatherings encouraged fierce intellectual discussions. What started out as a simple tea party quietly evolved into a hub of radical domesticity, serving as a vital, covert networking engine for political mobilization and the early women's suffrage movement.
So, we've seen how a simple cup of tea, a little white calling card, and a stale biscuit revealed everything about a Victorian's survival, wealth, and status. It really makes you wonder, hundreds of years from now, when historical anthropologists look back at us, what modern daily rituals will they analyze to uncover our own hidden class divides and social constraints? What exactly is our modern version of the calling card or the milk-in first divide? I'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.